people are a little bit ticked off about what the police have been doing for the past few days.
I love this. I was already radical as it was, but after I came back to New York City,
they were able to get down to NATO, and you know, the police prevented unpermitted merchants from getting down there. The police, if they had some sensibility about preventing violence rather than causing it, would have just let people be there, permit or no permit.
And to finish on that, Occupy Chicago doesn't need a permit. The First Amendment is our permit.
there you go. Shut them up.
I think it's clear to everyone in the world, and that especially means the people of Afghanistan and Pakistan, because they got CNN too. And CNN went live during the brutal clubbing of our friends and brothers and sisters. The reporter from CNN said he couldn't believe what he was witnessing on the streets of Chicago. The unparalleled brutality being unleashed against protesters against NATO. It already went out. Everyone in the world knows that NATO has been exposed as a war-making, violent organization. Yes, the word is out. I think that their success is very, very temporary, because their main success is they signed a deal with the puppet that we put into office in Afghanistan, that the puppet will allow us to keep our troops there for another decade. Karzai is a puppet. No one in Afghanistan supports him unless they're making money off the occupation. That is a meaningless commitment and a meaningless outcome of this summit. The real meaning of this summit is we have exposed NATO. You in the press, you know this. A year ago, no one in Chicago knew what the hell NATO is. Well, now it's a topic of every dinner table conversation in the city. What NATO is a violent organization that occupies other people's land.
North American terrorist occupation.
Just really quick, it should be noted that NATO representatives refused to either come out and meet with the Iraq Veterans Against the War or allow a secured delegation to go in to return their medal. That is the level of contempt that NATO has for the people who have been getting injured for it, who've been dying for it. And I think that that deserves our shame, that we need to condemn the contempt that was on display at the NATO summit yesterday for their refusal to meet with Iraq Veterans Against the War.
That's right.
Walking back in and filming the crowd.
I told you, throwing bottles, throwing rocks, there was violence on the part of protesters throwing stuff at police.
The Black Bloc did not hit any of the protesters. They didn't hit any of the police with billy clubs. They were wearing bandanas, most of them, which didn't protect them from a policeman's billy club. And we've made this very clear. The source of violence, and everyone in the press should be talking about this, are the thousands and thousands of people who are dying in Afghanistan and in Pakistan. That's the real violence that you should be reporting on, not the protests of a small group, or even our protests. What you really should be writing about is what terrible things our government is paying for in NATO's occupations. Thank you. Hold on, one second. Let's be clear here. If the real concern is violence when committed against someone who's got a darker shade of skin than mine, any less violence? Is it? Because if it isn't, then the violence of NATO, the violence in our press communities in this city should be getting more coverage, because there's certainly a hell of a lot more of it than was even on display yesterday by Chicago police. So if we're not talking about violence in general, if we're talking about violence against white people, then we can continue this parade.
Wait, hold on.
Everyone wants to talk about a handful of people who supposedly acted inappropriately yesterday. There were thousands in the street. Thousands. I was one of them. We were peaceful. people, these leaders, they're not afraid of violent anarchists. They're afraid of answering to the people. That's why the G8 ran and hid from us. Not because of violence, but because we demand accountability. They ran from us because they aren't willing to answer to the world for what they are doing. This protest gave us a chance to be heard. I never expected those delegates to hear me out. They only listen to other millionaires. They only listen to each other. They only listen to the banks. We needed the world to hear us, and the world has heard us. And the majority of the imagery out there, if you care to look at it, shows you. We were peaceful. The police were not.
It's important to remember that the police unleashed indiscriminate violence against people in the street last night. They didn't look into the crowd and pull out people who they deemed to be troublemakers. They didn't look into the crowd and take out people who they believed they had probable cause to arrest. Instead, they unleashed an incredible amount of deadly force, striking without care against anyone they could reach at the front of the march. It is totally inappropriate behavior for the police to lose control in such a way and leash out against the masses at the front of the march.
So they were not involved in any way.
Well, also, it's important to remember that the police did not set themselves up in a position last night to facilitate easy egress from that march. There were mountains of riot police positioned in a way to intimidate people, positioned as a show of force and attention, and those police were palpable. There was row upon row of riot police. 5 buses, at least, of Illinois State Police poured out at the end of the march, dressed in riot gear and with their batons prepared for violence. They set themselves up in a way that people, in order to leave, had to run themselves past a gauntlet of police officers, a gauntlet of riot police, who were looking at them every step of the way and scaring them. And even that gauntlet was so small that not everyone could get out.
This press conference is now finished, but we will be happy to have you
Why are you ignoring what the protesters who screwed off your protest?
All of our speakers will be available for individual questions. All of our speakers will be available for individual questions. A water bottle is not the same as a baton.
Excuse me. I heard about your mask. The medics told me about it. Pretty awesome. Yeah, and Adam. I came out here from the Bay Area too. I think so. I think they're catching a plane at 1. So the press conference has ended with the question of Fox News, the loaded question of Fox News being, so you deny any violence from protesters yesterday happened. At which point the press conference ended with 2 more words, or 4 more words being said. Water bottles are not, anyway, counting. Last thing being said, water bottles are not the same as batons. I guess that's 8. Women Supreme being awesome. Again, search YouTube for Vermin Supreme. Check out some of his videos sometime.